A little while ago, I came across a prayer from Maya Angelou, and I keep going back to her closing words from that prayer. So I wanted to share those this morning. Would you join me in echoing her words as we pray together? Dear Creator, you, the borderless sea of substance, we ask you to give all the world that which we need most: peace. You, the borderless sea of substance, we ask you to give all the world that which we need most: peace. So God, this morning I ask that we would be aware of your presence, a presence that is constant and comforting like the vast sea, that we would be able to see you in creation, the warmth of the sun, the welcomed breeze, the gift of community, a river of life. God who sees us, may we receive your true and active peace in the ways we need it most, through rest or encouragement, hope and renewal, joy and play, prompting and challenge. May we abide in your peace, and may we proclaim that peace in our actions and worship. Sweep us up in your mercy, and may we live into your loving justice. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Haley, and good to sing with you guys. Peace, peace, can we feel it? Well, I am Vince, and I'm one of the pastors here, and we hope that the prayer and the music has helped you to feel settled this morning, helped you to feel pulled outside of yourself, helped you to feel connected with God. We started this church in particular for people who are more comfortable in progressive or secular or multi-perspective settings rather than religious settings. And so if that's you, or if you love many who are like that, we think that you'll feel very welcome here, and we think that you'll feel very in view here. We, like most people, are trying to discover deep, full life that is beyond self-centeredness, that is beyond the status quo, that is resilient in challenges, and our guide here is Jesus. There are religious settings that present faith in Jesus. They do prevent faith in Jesus because they present faith in Jesus as an exclusive thing, as a boundary drawing thing, and even as aligned with like the powerful and the rich. Our experience is entirely different here. And so to us, following Jesus and spiritual growth that's grounded in the biblical tradition has always made us more inclusive, more humble, more compassionate, more sensitive to the suffering of others, not more closed off to it. And so that is what we are about here. My challenge this morning to those of us who are already a part of our community is to ask yourselves, who in this community is God asking me to check up on or tell them that I have their back? Quick texts and email messages or things like that are so much of the way community is happening right now because it has to, yes. But also I wonder if this is an opportunity for our community to deepen the binds that hold us together. Unlike most church communities, most church communities are pretty homogenous. They're all coming from the same shared religious background, but we are not like that, this community, which is awesome. But it means we tend to have extra work to do to get to know each other, to be known, because we can't fall back on religious familiarity. We can't always fall back on shared experience. Sometimes our experiences are really different. And so we have to do extra work to deepen our ties. And so I am encouraging us all this morning, who in this community is God asking you to check up on or tell them that you have their back? All right, well, as we unfold our discussion and a bit more time for prayer and worship today, we will have our chat moderated to answer all of our questions and concerns by the amazing Abby Dye. Abby, as you do you have any specific prompts for us as we go forward today?
Yeah, so I'm mostly just curious. This hot, what do people do to survive? Like, do you drive to Indiana and mooch off your family central air conditioning just to eat a lot of popsicles? Like, what are you? I'm coming back to Chicago, and I also need some help, so any ideas will.
Good to know. What are we doing to survive? And that wasn't at all autobiographical, I can tell.
No, not at all. None at all.
Okay. Well, at this point, thank you, Abby. So drop in the chat. What are you doing to survive in this time? Heat, COVID-19, lockdown, all of these things. At this point, I will introduce us once again to my co-pastor, Kyle Hannawalt, as we turn toward today's discussion. Hi, Kyle.
Hello. And I will say I recently realized living with Central Air now, I didn't as a child. I realized how much time I spent growing up trying to stay cool, just navigating how hot I get. And it's like this whole part of my life has opened up now that I don't live in a house that I'm constantly trying to navigate that. But it's a real thing. I'd say cold showers was my go-to all through childhood. The cold shower right before bed was a way to go. And then the fan.
Okay, there we go. Abby's taking notes for her life so she can survive. Thanks. That's good. Well, we're in the middle of a series of discussions that we've called God of the Oppressed, this phrase that we've mentioned we borrowed from James Cone, who is a writer on Black liberation theology. And what we're doing, if you're just jumping in or if you need a reminder, we're immersing ourselves in various different oppressed people groups' perspectives on Jesus and on faith and on the Bible. And we're trying to do that one at a time. And the reason is because in America, what colors most of our understandings of Jesus and of God is a powerful perspective. The people who have written all of the books that have been published and then passed around to seminaries, and then seminaries pass them on to pastors, and then pastors teach them in churches, are all almost exclusively come from European, American, straight, white, male, dominant culture perspectives. And they've taught us a ton of things, but they are just a disproportionate amount of weight at the center. And so what we are trying to do is say that has serious limitations when that's the case. For one thing, we are not really talking about Jesus if we're talking about power, because Jesus was an oppressed person. He was a minority within an empire. And then also because when any of us are facing the hardest things of life, when we're facing suffering or loss or challenge, we don't turn to the most powerful or high status people to teach us how to get through it, right? When you struggle with heat, you don't turn to somebody who has central air to teach you, right? So we turn to someone who is acquainted with the hardship that we're facing. It is suffering and loss and challenge that binds us all together, and we need a God who sees that. I mean, right now in our community, I took a survey of just people that we've interacted with in the church just to know what's going on in people's lives. We have people whose loved ones are dying. We have people who are experiencing broken relationships and betrayal. We have people who are experiencing loneliness, health concerns, discrimination and prejudice in their workplaces, stress and anxiety, loss of work and unemployment. We need a God who knows what it's like to endure these sorts of things and overcome these sorts of things, who have learned what it is to fight injustice and then find hope and resilience in spite of it. And it is oppressed people groups, much more than people of power, who can teach us about that God. So that's why we're doing this. Today's discussion, so far we've been hearing from perspectives that are not usually centralized. So if you've been following along, we heard from an LGBTQ voice, we heard from a Latin American voice, we heard from a second-generation Korean immigrant voice. If you've missed any of these, you can do yourself a favor and go back and check them. Guys, this is some of the best stuff that our church has ever done. They are really fantastic. You can find them all. All of the discussions are in the Brownline Church podcast, which you can do through podcasting, whatever app you like. Or starting this week, actually, thanks to the amazing Mike Frazier. If anybody knows Mike Frazier, give Mike some I don't know what I'm giving. Am I giving him raising the roof right now? I'm a little bit embarrassed. Let's stop that. We're going to give Mike props or applause, right? Mike Frazier is going to be curating our new YouTube channel, which is a way for somebody to find all of our past services. All of our services are now recorded since we've been online. And so what you can do is this is a one place where you can go and they'll just all be there. So starting this week, we're going to have that available. We'll drop a little bit later in the service info on the YouTube link. Okay, so anyway, all I'm doing is just telling you what we've been doing. We've been centralizing not usually centralized voices. But in order to do that, the other side of that is that we have to make space for those who are not usually, we have to make space for those who are not usually centralized by decentralizing what has taken up too much space. And that is what today is about. Decentralizing the God of power and that perspective. Today's going to be part one, and I'm going to interview Kyle, our wonderful co-pastor, about pivotal shifts in his personal story as a straight, white, middle-class guy following Jesus that has shifted him away from the God of the powerful and toward a God of the oppressed view. So we're going to learn what were those shifts. We're going to learn what marginalized perspectives taught him those shifts. We're going to learn when and how did they happen, and how did they transform him, and how did they make his faith more like something that serves him. What did he have to sacrifice as a person of privilege to follow that? We're going to learn all those things. So as a reminder, please chime into the chat. Abby is moderating that. We'll rope her in eventually to kind of steer our discussion as we go along. But let's get going with what Kyle has prepared for us today. Kyle, I'm going to share our points that we'll look at here, and then I want you to just kind of walk us through them.
You know, before I jump in, I think the reason why I think this conversation is so important is because myself, as a white man living in America, who grew up highly involved in church, all of the frameworks of faith that I gave authority to, the voices that helped shape the way that I read the Bible and helped shape the way that I engaged with the world around me, with one exception, were white men. So whether we're talking about like Martin Luther and John Calvin, or Billy Graham, or John Wimber, or the pastors of my own church and my father, and another white man, I think the one exception in this was just my mother being the one non-white male voice that really helped shape the way that I saw the world. And still to this day, I think there's so many things from that I think highlight a healthy version of faith. And so for me, there was a process of having to listen to and learn from perspectives that were not echoed in kind of my primary experience of faith, and the ways that helped decentralize powerful white men voices and listen to the voices of other people, listen to people that were not coming from European American white male perspective, how much that really did enhance and grow and give me a greater sense of freedom in how I saw and believed God, because he became so much bigger and richer.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we're excited to learn some more. So let's get our first point up and you can tell us about it. The first point is that power teaches an in versus out faith to uphold the status quo. And what we're shifting toward is powerlessness teaches a journeying faith. So Kyle, when did this happen? How did it happen? Tell us more.
So I went to North Park University for my undergrad, and I developed a pretty close relationship with a professor there named Dr. Brad Nassif. And his background is in Eastern Orthodox theology. And in that experience with him, spent a lot of time studying early patristics known as the Desert Fathers, and studying the evolution of how theology was formed in the Eastern world, opposed to how theology was formed in the Western world, in Europe and America. And for me, there was certain shifts in the way that things came together that kind of opened my eyes to an experience of faith that actually felt really helpful to me. And so maybe the way that he used to say this is, it's not so much that the Eastern Church came up with different answers, it's that they asked different questions. And so the biggest kind of key point to look at this here is, in the Western Church and in America and Europe, we have been hyper obsessed with point of salvation. At what point did you enter in to be able to be, in forever? And there's been violence and strife and disagreement. It's a big reason why there are something about 2,000 different denominations in our country. It has to do with the different ways we slice in versus out. It's a very Western way of thinking about things. We want to define it down to the point. Well, in the Eastern Church, the main focus was something called divinization. It's the idea that the focus in life is not pinpointing the point you became in and thus trying to convince the whole world around you to come in. It is that we are all on a journey of divinization. Divinization, in other words, being one with God, being God-like, becoming like the divine. It's a journey that we can never quite achieve, but the process is not achieving godlikeness within ourselves, but rather journeying for it throughout our whole life. And so the question asked is not, what point am I in? Or is that behavior or that action something that is in versus out? It is about progressing along the journey. There's an image in the Eastern Church that we move from the garden in Genesis to the beautiful city in Revelation. We are moving forward in progression. And to me, this was greatly freeing, recognizing that a lot of the ways that my in versus out perspectives were formed really were about maintaining a status quo. We're really about, once I'm in, and I'm maintaining that. And then I'm hyper focused on defining where other people are. Because once I'm in, that's the tension is, where is that behavior in or out? Is that person in or out? And then, maybe I'm even feeling pressure to convince people to jump into the in with me. Because a big part of my own staying in is that I'm convincing other people to be in with me. Opposed to a faith of journey, which is asking a different question. We've talked a lot about in our church this idea of a bounded set, a circle, you're either in or out. Opposed to centered set, where there's a dot, which would be Jesus in our case, or in the Eastern Orthodox position, it would be divinization, one with God. And the question for us is not, are we in or out, but are we journeying towards that? And that to me was I was introduced that way before I was introduced to bounded set and centered set. And it radically changed the questions I asked about faith, and it radically shifted where my attention went to in faith.
So this sounds like very much a sort of early on shift that later on, I think, like you like water this plant and you see what it flowers into, is that in the journeying faith, there's no need to exert your power. There's no need to manage all of these other people. And so therefore it is a less violent, it is a more equitable, more just approach to faith. And because you're so much less like distracted by qualifying or judging or categorizing other human beings.
Yeah, I think a good way to think about this is, you think about a lot of the theology we get out of the West, and it is very much defined on, let's define what's in versus out. And it's a lot of white men, and it feels to me, somebody that grew up with a worldview that I kind of, how I interpreted the world, which was constantly dividing. Is that person in? Is that person out? Is that person a Christian? Is that a non-Christian? Is that person healthy or not healthy? I kind of went through the world just living in this kind of binary space. And as a privileged person, for me, in a lot of ways, it maintained a status quo of, I am always going to be the one that is in, and I'm understanding the world through that lens. Opposed to, for me, the way that you think about, there's a book that I read of one of these early patristics, The Ladder of Divine Ascent. It's all about what's the next step I'm taking. And then my attention around me is not so much constantly trying to figure out where I land, and it's no longer holding me up as a status quo. As a powerful person, I cannot ever be satisfied. I am always trying to tackle something within myself, and I am journeying forward, which calls to account, I think, the powerful in a way that a lot of kind of Western theology that's based in a very kind of binary understandings of things often lives. And the truth is, a lot of these theologies were born out of places of power. Like John Calvin's Geneva, they became the powerful people there that were literally persecuting other people around them for disagreeing with them. And the way that Western theology and politics have so always brought together, we just as humans are not clever enough. When we bring in versus out, it's just power always finds its way in, opposed to a journeying faith, which is just asking different questions.
Very good, very good. I am thinking back to something that you shared years ago in a talk where we were talking about some manner of in versus out, and I remember you said something that really was provocative. It was like, what we should take notice of is that in America, if you think about what does it look like, what's the picture of a godly person? There's a real problem with that if what that most maps on top of, with overlap, is being a middle-class, white, married, straight guy. And it's like when there's too much overlap with those, I think we might be talking about something we don't think we're talking about.
Well, if you think about what traditional evangelicalism asks of us, the challenges it presents to us, particularly if you think even just a half generation ago, where it was widely accepted that women need to take a subordinate position, but even today, where there's still other questions in there, the person that is the least challenged by American evangelicalism is a cisgender, straight, married white man. He just gets to, as long as he's staying faithful, staying somewhat responsible with his money. The challenge asked of him is you can live your life, you can do whatever you want, you can exist in any way you want to in the society, and that to me is a red flag. When we have taken the most powerful subset of a human and said, hey, guess this most powerful subset is going to require the least amount of challenge, it makes me wonder if we've conflated a picture of Jesus with a picture of the status quo. And so to me, I think that's an important question for us to wrestle with when we are challenging people who experience marginalization in the rest of their life, and they're the ones that are facing the greatest challenge in our theology, women, non-cisgender, LGBTQ, people who are single. If we're asking the greatest burden on them, I think maybe we are not fully aware and in touch with the way that our culture is influencing us.
Boy, how can we not think of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez's words this last week after hearing you say that? I mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right, let's move on to our next point that you have for us here, Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
It is that power teaches individualistic sin to avoid structural sin. But what we're shifting toward is powerlessness teaches liberation from sinful structures. All right, tell us more.
We touched on this a little bit last week with Linda, but I had the privilege of listening to a few lectures in person from Gustavo Gutierrez, kind of the father of Latin American liberation theology. And to me, it really did shift a lot of the ways that I thought about things. And kind of in this picture of liberation theology, holding up kind of the Exodus story a lot at the heart. And the way that I think is most helpful to me is it changed the way that I interpreted and understood the 10 Commandments. So individualist sin it's entirely focused on my moral purity. I am making choices about maintaining a sense of internal, individualistic, personalized, personal covenant between me and God. You and I are agreeing to something, and sin is the ways that I am breaking that agreement with you. And then that's the way that's experienced. And so 10 Commandments could be seen as, this is my agreement and covenant with you, God. I won't lie. I won't commit adultery. I won't hold other gods before you. And when I do those, the violation I experience is between me and you. The truth, but to me, after listening to Gustavo Gutierrez, who, if you want to think back to our conversation with Barbie, of a lot of our Latin American world being marked by dictatorship, being marked by just an incredibly oppressive government experience. For them, the conversation of liberation is actually the sin, the brokenness of it all is not just an individualized personal morality, it is the brokenness of the world around us. And actually what God is bringing liberation from is not just my own sense of like, I've been a bad person, but a sense of I participate in evil structures, and he's constantly fighting against them. And so in the Exodus narrative, of course, you see the Israelites, God liberating them from Egypt, this people that they had actually brought prosperity to under Joseph and protection to under Joseph, but the kind of tribalism within Egypt led to them turning on them because the Pharaoh realized, hey, actually there's a lot of Jews here. The Hebrews are people, I'm actually afraid of losing my power. So he enslaves them, and God comes in and brings liberation. It's actually in pretty intense, fierce ways through the different plagues that he brings. And then after they're freed, he brings the 10 Commandments. Now, so for me, when I'm shifting my brain away from individualism and I'm shifting it towards a picture of understanding that sin exists in our world, our society, our structure, and not just within me, then I see the 10 Commandments is not just about you maintaining a personal covenant with you and God, but it's about a people maintaining a covenant to protect the justice of that society. This is a new nomadic group that's traveling around. And if you read through those 10 commandments, I cannot think of 10 better things I would put in place for those new Hebrews to maintain a safety within that society. Like, I think it's, one of those things is, I always like, one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not lie. No, it's not that. It's thou shalt not bear false witness against their neighbor, which to me is just an interesting shift of saying, like, we need to live in a society where we are not calling each other out. Fidelity changes that. It's not just that I was like morally, sexually immoral. It's that what infidelity leads to, in even today, profoundly in ancient history, but even today, is usually women and children being left in poverty. And so, like, you think about the structural implications of sin, it just frames it away for me. And the reason why that's important is because if sin is purely about my individual purity, then I do not have to confront the brokenness of a society around me that is holding me up by the status quo. I can be totally personally moral and not challenge the structural racism in our schools. As long as I'm not being racist, and that's what we see a lot. I'm not racist, but we participate in a racist system. I'm not racist is I'm defending myself from the individual sin. I'm participate in a racist system is we need liberation from sinful structures. And it's important for people of power to make sure that we're not so focused on individualism that we miss the way that Jesus lives in our structures in society. And to me, that like blew my mind. It opened up my world listening to Gustavo talk about a experience of reality that I have a different responsibility towards.
That is really something. And I guess I want to ask a little bit more about how, like, kind of tease out all the different ways this affected you. I mean, certainly it would make you somebody who, once again, like, these are early seeds and like what has flowered, and to become somebody who whose heart is moved by injustice and wants to be a part of that. And so, I mean, that's a lot of the I think the fruition of what we're seeing in you. But also, I feel like this says a lot to, I mean, the shift away from sin is all individualistic to understanding sin is more structural also sounds like for you as an individual, that actually is much more freeing, and like you like that a lot more, and you actually therefore have more energy and passion and less fear about going and being a part of tearing down structural sin. I mean, can you talk about like how do you live that out? And it sounds like it'd be so much better, that this shift.
Well, I experience my current faith as more life-giving and freeing in two different ways. One of them is I have a lot less anxiety than I used to about my faith. Both this idea of this hyper-focused on individual transgression and this hyper-focus on in versus out. It's an anxious system. Where am I in the game? How am I doing? And the individualism sin was very much like, what's the checklist? Like, if I think of the 10 Commandments as a checklist, oh, did I bear false witness this last week? It's a very anxiety-filled system. But when I've shifted into a different, into what I currently experience right now, it's much more about asking God each day what he has for me and inviting him into that experience with me. And so then to me, what I do with my full-time job is trying to address structural racism and resource gaps around income within the public school system. That's like what I do. And to me, this idea of seeing the structure of our school system in America as the sin that Jesus is dying on the cross for, and not just, maybe if I said something racist, he died for that. Like that to me, that shift right there, it not only feels a sense of God pulling me into something more, but it also puts me in a different perspective. When I feel like I'm actually like, as long as I'm not being racist, I'm good. And then God's calling me to like fight against racism. I'm the hero of that story. However, in this liberation perspective, I am not the hero in the story. I am party to the status quo that for generations has systemically and strategically created inequitable outcomes. And I get called into a richer version of the world. I get to have a better version of my life fighting for a more just world. Not because I'm a hero, because I'm not. It's because every action I get, every action I take towards making the kingdom of heaven here on earth, every action I see bringing Jesus's grace and forgiveness and freedom into this world, to me, I see it not just because I lied last week and Jesus forgives me from that, but because Jesus is actively fighting back against the narratives of Black and brown children that tell them that they are troublemakers and that they are less important, and that the way that schools are set up to kind of sort and track kids, that is something that God is fighting against. That, to me, it's a much richer and freer experience of life.
Well, that's good. And just to bring in a perspective that our church really feels passionate about, also centralizing, is the voice of people who are spiritually inclined but outsiders in church. And I'm sort of as I grow up, I'm more of a secular kid, a progressive kid who finds myself ending up like being passionate about going to church and being a praying person. And one thing that has always puzzled me from that perspective is how much the language from a more individualistic sin church world could claim that somebody like me didn't care about morality, like didn't care about human beings, and it just always felt that, what? Like, I don't care about morality. Like I care deeply about what happens to other human beings. I think it was what was different. Is it individualistic or is it structural? And that's given me eyes to see something that I've always been confused about, and as somebody who's kind of coming from a church outsider perspective culturally.
You know, I have a friend who I grew up going to church with who has since left church and is not interested at this point. And talking to him about it, he was saying it feels really challenging because it feels like church was a place where I got to feel like a good person without actually changing anything about the status quo. And I think that speaks to what's happening in our world right now. It very much is the case of like, we're super attentive to people's personal like the sexual morality, and that all of our attention is there. And not to say there aren't high stakes in terms of sexual morality, there are very high stakes. But when we are only thinking about sin, and to me, even as I think about sexual morality, the way I think about it is a lot different now. It's not so much a personal offense to God because, you broke your rules with him. It's living in a society where there's children where the stakes of what happens in terms of sexual connection are just extremely high. Children, the breaking up of marriages, these are real structural challenges. And that's, I think we need to take it real seriously for sure, including the emotional effect on it. But to me, it is not just because God is angry at me because, that's why I need to be careful with my sexual morality. It's because we live in a world with real impact and stuff, particularly like if I would go back to my 15-year-old self who believed that all God asked of me was to maintain sexual purity, I would go back to him again and say, hey, dude, you're 15. You shouldn't be doing this. The consequences are bigger than you can do. But it's not because God's super angry with you. It's because God cares about a just society and cares about your life. And the consequences of this are really huge. It's just a different conversation. Again, as we're talking about in the earlier question, it's not so much our answers are different, but certainly our questions are.
Oh, wonderful. Great stuff, Kyle. Great stuff. All right, we have one more point here that we want to get to, and I'm just loving it so much I'm going too long. So if we go a little long today, that's Vince's fault, not Kyle's fault, okay? All right, our final point is power teaches a tribal Jesus to colonize and control. Powerlessness teaches translating Jesus to each context. So Kyle, when did you learn this, and how did it affect you? And tell us more.
So I spent about a decade working for this Presbyterian organization, and the person I worked for directly, I was just doing admin stuff, but the thing that his focus was working with Muslim background followers of Jesus. And he hosted lots of conversations where it was Muslims and Christians coming together and just learning and connecting, working with followers of Jesus who still identify culturally as Muslim. And it was this really interesting thing that I'm trying to figure out as a child is how on earth could you say you follow Jesus if you don't claim being a Christian? It's just silliness, right? Of course, Christians have co-opted it. And so in the context of working with this guy, and my first connection with him is he was actually intersecting with somebody else that I was connected with in my own kind of church world named Carl Medeiros. And this started this whole conversation of what does it mean to follow Jesus? And he has this whole image of there's a soccer game, right? And there's like, you know, the Muslim side and the Christian side, and we're at battle. And then all of a sudden Jesus appears in the middle of the game. And then all of a sudden we're like trying to claim him. The Christians are like, oh, our superstar is here. Come on, Jesus, let's go. Let's take on those Muslims. And then he walks to the middle of the field and he's like, I'm not on any team. I just want you to follow me. And it's this idea that actually still exists today, which is what they call the insider movement. It's people who still identify as being Muslim, but they follow Jesus. And it's because what their religion means to them is a cultural thing. It's about how they relate to their family. It's the holidays they celebrate. It's part of who they are culturally. And so there's this idea that, you know, when Carl Medeiros was out talking to some Muslims, and this guy said, oh, I'm a Muslim that follows Jesus. And then Carl, who is culturally Christian as an American, said, oh, I guess I'm a Christian who follows Jesus. And the reason this was so helpful for me is it moved pursuit of Jesus away from the cultural frameworks of faith. And it helped me for one of the first times really see how much in America Christianity is a culture, and it has given voice to claim Jesus, but Jesus does not exist within American Christianity. Jesus exists within the invitation to all of us. And so what I realized is that one of the things that happens throughout history is when people are trying to claim Jesus, it happened most profoundly in the way that colonization happened all through our world. Is people saying, you want to follow Jesus? Well, you know what following Jesus looks like? Changing the way you dress, changing the way that you do traditions, changing the way you raise children, changing your culture. And there was a large movement that I was introduced to in my early 20s of starting to realize that what's more important than people understanding the culture around Jesus is people understanding Jesus, and then figuring out what does it mean for somebody who grew up culturally Muslim to still own that identity but still follow Jesus. And then likewise for me, what are the parts of my culture as a Christian that I find really oppressive? And I'm holding on to them because I somehow believe that Jesus needs me to hold on to them. When the truth is, in my context, God actually wants me to do something far more dynamic.
Very good, very good. Well, we're running a little low on time, so I want to invite Abby in if there's anything going on from our chat, comments or questions, a space for like some final takeaways from Kyle here.
Yeah, so Kyle, you mentioned that how we can be, so focused on the structure and individual roles that we kind of forget to see where and how Jesus lives in our society. And a lot of people, I think, are really resonating with the idea of this in versus out, and finding it helpful to have some words to describe their experiences. And just, reading through what some people are saying in the chat, it seems like there have been a lot of like gotcha moments that people have experienced with this type of faith system, with, so heavy on definition. And then really with this idea of the shift to looking at a bigger structural sin rather than individual defensiveness, it's more aligned to a Western view, I think Isaac was saying. And so we're not really looking at the little ways that we support these larger systems that marginalize other people. So I think there's actually a lot of great discussion in the chat just about how this resonates with people, but then, kind of putting that on our larger sort of Western society, as well as you were kind of just mentioning as well.
And I think this is why it's so important that we are learning from people that are not just coming from our perspective. And so, and it's because we miss the way that we hurt each other. We miss the way that the world is oppressive to each other. And so I think when we see these religious environments that are very often totally homogenous, and even the ones that are pretty diverse, they're usually they're diverse, but the thing that holds them together usually is a really particular evangelical theology. Yes. That is it's the Christian culture piece. So yes, you may come from a different ethnic background, but we share the same kind of Christian culture thing. And that's why I think it's really important that we're interacting with and learning and connecting with people that don't share the same assumptions with us, because we will be blinded, particularly for me. particularly if you are somebody who benefits from the status quo. Because I go back to what Mr. Juilliard said from that talk, the first step to structural change is admitting things are not okay. And if I'm looking through my lens of life, yeah, things are kind of hard, but at the end of the day, like, it's not like, it kind of looks okay, you know what I mean? And so I need to make sure that I'm stepping into the perspectives of Gustavo Gutierrez that's living out dictatorship in South America. I need to be able to step into the eyes of a Muslim background follower of Jesus who is living in an incredibly different context. And the idea of being forced away from their cultural expressions of being a Muslim is an incredibly hard experience. Or I need to step back and listen to somebody whose entire worldview has not been shaped by intellectual, cisgender, straight white men who are coming from Europe or America. It's just so important what this series means. And it is like extra important for me, because without it, I'm just going to miss where Jesus is working in the world. And then I'm just going to believe it's happening within me.
Well, there we go. And that is the optimal word for today's talk, is decentralizing. We're taking it out of the center. So this is great. Kyle, thank you so much for kind of sharing a little bit. I think we've gotten glimpses of these stories in your like talks over the years, but it's great to kind of have it all in one place and how that connects with what we're doing in this series. And even as we're talking, I am feeling like there are a lot of, I'm just feeling very excited for the rest of our series that is to come.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that I thought of just as it was brought up here is we'll be hearing soon from our friend Maria Santillan, who will be talking about being a church outsider. And it gets at this thing that you were mentioning there at the end, which is a key thing about diversity that's not often discussed when it comes to discussions of privilege, and especially when it comes to discussions of privilege in church, is religious privilege. We do not talk about that. We do not talk about how you're rewarded if you know the insider lingo, or if you can even if you can make a joke that is pointing at something that you don't like if you know the references for the joke, that shows your privilege. What does it mean to be somebody who is spiritually inclined, but has never found a church home, or always felt like, I don't know, that just felt like a different culture for me? And so I'm really excited to talk with our friend Maria, who represents that perspective, and we'll get to hear a little bit from her about that. I'm very excited. We're going to be hearing from our friend Lester Mitchell and talking about the perspective of a Black man in America on faith and on God. We're going to dig into a little bit of Black liberation theology. And I saw in the chat some people were asking about wanting to learn a little bit more about that. So we're going to be doing that. And then finally, as I mentioned, in light of the rebuke of toxic male behavior that we saw from AOC earlier this week, we're also going to be having a discussion about feminist theology. And so there's lots to get excited about in this series as we look ahead to the next month. We hope that you guys are really appreciating this. And again, you can go back and listen to all of the old ones on what will be our YouTube channel. Very excited about that. But also you can always find them on the podcast that we've had. Kyle, as we let this kind of sink in, would you pray for us and before we move to announcements?
Yeah. Well, Jesus, we are deeply grateful that you desire life, you desire freedom, you desire liberation, you desire justice, you desire to be close and love us. And we pray that today we would find you showing up with us and inviting us into a deeper experience of life. That you would help kind of pull off the veils, pull off all of the lenses, all of the things that disguise us or disguise you from us. The things that when are presented to us and we're saying, if that's Jesus, if that's God, if that's what following you looks like, then I don't know, something seems off there. And you can pull away all of that and present yourself to us. And that for those of us who are images of you just are profoundly rooted in white men telling us about you. Even the irony of me talking here, that you would be so dynamically alive, that you would be inviting us into a relationship with you as you are, not you as filtered and centered on the narratives of white men. And that you would help us all kind of take a breath, and see what you have for us. And in the vein of what I've experienced, that we would ask what's next on our journey, and you would bring that to us. You would ask us to look at the structures of the world around us and say, Jesus, how do we participate in change? Not just defend whether we ourselves are in the wrong. And we ask, what are the ways that you uniquely speak to me? And what are the things that are just culture, so that we can see your love coming to life in our lives? Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, we have some quick announcements here. One, we mention our Sunday check-in every time we're together. We have this down, as you have heard if you're with us, to less than 1 minute. It's so easy to do a Sunday check-in. You just follow the link and let us know. This is the best way to let us know if you have a prayer request, or if you have a need, or you want to connect over coffee, because we're not able to do that just as we pass each other at the Davis Theater on Sundays. So just follow the link. It's real fast. If you are newer with us, if you are Zooming in or Facebook Living in and you want to connect further, you want to grab coffee, we'd love for you to fill out our Connect card online. Just let us know your contact information, and we can follow up with you and get to know you a little bit better. We'd love that. We're big fans of just grabbing coffee and getting to know people's stories and where they come from, and so we'd love to do that with you. The best ways to stay connected right now are, one, we've mentioned now a number of times, because I'm very excited that our friend Mike Frazier is running our YouTube channel for us. We really, this is the best way. If you've missed a Sunday and you're trying to I don't know, even in the middle of the week, I hear about people who are they're feeling kind of down, and they just need some space to guide them into prayer, because it's really hard to do that in the middle of the week on your own. Pull up one of the recordings from one of our Sundays, and you can get a chance to follow along. If you missed a discussion, you can engage that way. You'll get led in prayer. You'll get a sense of other people doing things in the community. So we have dropped in the chat for you the YouTube channel, which will have our full recordings. Our podcast is, again, the other way. If that's a way that you consume information or stay up to date on the world, our podcast will just automatically go to your phone, and you can stay up that way. And then also our email newsletter, which is going out at least twice a week, just to kind of let people know, hey, here is the latest ways to connect. Here's what's happening on Sunday. Here's how you join the service. And then you can follow us on social if that's a way that you stay connected. If you are in financial need due to COVID-19, the church can help bridge a gap. And so we're mentioning our Time of Need Fund. You can go to the link that we're going to drop into the chat and fill that out. Even if it's not been the case up to this point, or it's only becoming the case, please do feel no hesitation to reach out. Everything that you share is confidential here, will not be shared beyond our pastoral staff. And we would love to be able to help. We are able to help people in this time. Finally, we are a crowd-funded church, so we'll throw a financial update up on the screen for you, and we'll ask, would you consider a recurring gift? The way that we operate as a church is through people pooling together. We don't have massive organizations that give us grants to fund what we do here. It is all the people who call this church home, feel invested in this church, pooling together. Monthly donations is 90% of our income. And so you'll get a little update of how we're doing here on the screen there. For one final announcement, I'm going to swing it over to Haley Larson, who runs our opening prayers every week here in church, and she has an ask for us all as a community to help with that.
Thanks, Vince. So I'm putting together a prayers of the people for this season for us to be able to pray together next week, and need some input from others in order to do that. And I want us to be able to really lift up authentic needs and joys of our community in this space, not just some generic overall asks that I think are popping up in the world right now, but really tailoring it in to be specific for this community. So it'd be wonderful if you could send me something that you are celebrating or thanking God for, and something that you are grieving or asking God for. So if something comes to mind right now and you want to type that up as you're thinking, you can feel free to send that over on the chat. There's a post up on the Brown Line Facebook group that you can put that in a comment. You can send it to me privately, whatever's the easiest thing for you. So it's just something that you are thanking God for, celebrating in this season, and then something that you are grieving or asking God for. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from people and being able to kind of check in on what our collective needs and hopes and joys are.
Thank you, Haley. And I'm looking forward to next week when you collect those and offer a prayer on all of our behalf. Thanks for that. Haley, could you drop your email in the chat for us so that we can email you and be reminded on that front? Thank you. All right, well, at this point, Kyle, would you lead us in communion before we sing one more song of prayer together?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to participate with something physical, please take a moment and go grab something to drink, grab something to eat. All throughout history and all throughout the world, all sorts of different things have been used to be symbolized in this place. So whatever you have on hand will be just fine. We do take this moment each week to pause and acknowledge that we are flawed people, that we have shortcomings, limitations, that we have lenses into which we see an imperfect version of the world around us. And we look to Jesus for the help we can't give ourselves in life. We look for Jesus's help on a greater perspective of the world, Jesus's help to find hope that we can fight for justice, Jesus's help for guidance and challenge on what is next for us, Jesus' help in healing the woundings that so often prevent us from finding life that is fuller. Because God's deep, deep affection for us desires more. And as we look to the cross, as is symbolized here through the bread symbolizing his body broken, the cup symbolizing his blood shed, we do so in acknowledgement of that deep affection, that self-sacrificial affection for us. Not that we're looking to another violent image of what is necessary, that God openly desired to hurt and murder us, but instead took that upon Jesus so that he could feel right with us. Instead, a God who stepped into the suffering and violence, the systemic inequity, the oppression and the persecution that still exists in our world today, and stood in front of it and says, with this death, I bring resurrection. I walk with you through this to offer a better version of the world. And in this, work with you to bring heaven to earth, to bring a richer, fuller, freer experience for all of us made in God's image. And we do so together because we recognize that the image of God lives in each one of us, and therefore we must see each of us. Because if we don't see each other here, we will be seeing a limited and imperfect vision of who he is. And we remind ourselves that he did not leave us on our own, that he walks with us himself and through the people around us that support us and walk with us in life. And so we do this as a reminder of a God with us and a people with us. So in the night he was betrayed, he broke bread, he gave thanks. He said, this is my body, which is for you. Whenever you do this, do so in remembrance of me. Likewise, he took the cup and he said, this is my blood shed for you. Whenever you do this, do so in remembrance of me. Oh, and Jesus, I do richly, richly sit here in remembrance of you as one who does bring healing and restoration to my heart, but also offers me participation in a larger work, participation in a world that moves towards justice, participation in a world that moves towards seeing each other and caring for each other as you care for us. And I pray this week that I would see opportunity for that, and I'd see you alive in those moments. Amen.
Love that will not betray, dismay, or enslave you, it will set you free. more like all that you were made to be. There is a design and alignment, the cry of my heart to see the beauty of love as it was made to be. Love that will not betray, dismay, or enslave you. It will set you free. Be more like all that you were made to be. There is a design and alignment, the cry of my heart to see the beauty of love as it was made to be. Love that will not betray, dismay, or enslave you. It will set you free. More like all that you were made to be. There is a design and alignment, the cry of my heart to see the beauty of love as it was made to be.
Lord Jesus, I pray right now that this moment, this season would remove scales from our eyes. That seeing the racial injustice laid bare, seeing federal troops coming into cities, seeing all of the things what we've seen in the last 2 months would tear down any notion that the problem with the world is just not upsetting you. May we no longer walk forward in ignorance of the ways that we participate in a world full of evil, and that your word come to life here is to bring justice. And what you have for all of us is to move forward.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Kyle, for sharing so openly. Thank you, Haley, for leading us in prayer and preparing us for prayer next week. Thank you, Abby, for running our moderating. Thank you, Laura, for running our visuals. You're awesome. We are so grateful for everybody who's coming together to make our services happen every week. If you are sticking around for our breakouts, we should say thank you to Christina and Kezia, who are leading our book study on Austin Channing Brown. If you're sticking around for the equity group that's doing the book study right now, please just stick around and we'll get you in that breakout group. If you're sticking around for a check-in and prayer with the pastor, please stick around and just send me a private message and I'll put you in the right group. For everyone else, we'll see you next week. Don't forget the YouTube channel. If you forgot one, go find it.